Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, welcome out to Truth Be Told. Yet another session for Mike Maney and myself, Rick Howard. And today is session number 30. And today is June the 2nd, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So we here in the Central Valley, that means a lot of hot temperatures.
Yes.
We're up close to 100 the last few days. Memorial Day was about 100. And today is Wednesday, so we're on a little string of hot temps. It's going to cool down to the mid to upper 90s over the next several days.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So this is the beginning of about 3 to 4 months of 90 is a decent day, but most days are 95 to 100,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even 105 or so. And that's life in the valley in the summer.
Yeah.
It's what I grew up with. I grew up, 3 months off of school, wearing cutoff shorts, no shirt, no hat, no sun protection.
And probably no shoes either.
Barefoot.
Barefoot. Yeah.
And so it means for the last 20 years or so I used to be blonde when I had hair and had blue eyes and fair skin.
Yeah.
The last 20 years, I've seen a dermatologist most every year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of liquid nitrogen,
Yeah.
some surgeries, some
Yeah.
other procedures.
Yeah.
A few times having to put that chemo cream all over my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you wear a hat when you go out though, right? You wear a hat.
I do now, but I just hate hats.
Yeah.
I just really dislike them. They're uncomfortable. Makes me sweat.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I just really don't like them, but I wear them.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be out for just a short time, I don't. My wife gets on to me.
Yeah.
She says, every morning when you get up, put on sunscreen.
Yeah.
But I don't.
But
I just don't. So I may pay the price someday.
yes. Yes. Yeah.
My smart aleck response is, well, they tell us through COVID that one of the most important things we can have is vitamin D.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm getting my vitamin D.
Yes.
Being out in the sun. So I may die of melanoma, skin cancer, but at least I'll have a lot of vitamin D and catch COVID.
Yeah, but it won't be COVID. Yeah, we won't give him that stat.
So,
well, you stay healthy, brother. You stay healthy. If I have to mail you a hat, I'll mail you a hat.
So you have a full head of hair, and you're more dark complected than I am.
It's the Irish.
The Irish?
Yeah, yeah. I've got Irish. Well, my dad's Irish. Yeah, Irish mix. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think like probably most Americans, I have some Irish.
Yeah.
A lot of Scandinavian, a lot of Upper European. So, that fair skin, blue eye, blonde hair.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be out in the sun kind of person, which I grew up from about Memorial Day to Labor Day was one continuous sunburn.
Oh. Wow.
And, we just didn't know a whole lot about sunblock or danger of it all. And
I remember one time.
But just kind of ignored it. I played ball all day like that.
Oh, yeah.
Swim.
Yeah.
That's just how life was. And now, it's kind of caught up to me. And
well, it does. Yeah. I remember on the beach in California several years ago. And you just have a lawn chair and you're sitting there, you're visiting, you're talking and everything. After a little bit of volleyball, you're just sitting there. And the sun was just cooking my right arm. I mean, just baking it. And I didn't realize it. And it was the worst burn I ever had. I was peeling it off in just sheets of skin. It was just, but I like to see how big a piece I could get. I tried to peel it slow and try to get a nice big piece of skin. But it was the worst burn I've ever had. So I do know about sunburn, but that was California. That wasn't here.
Well, I've just noticed something, and this gets a little bit maybe too much information. What is that, TMI?
Yeah, TMI, yeah.
But I've heard women in my life talk about how especially if they drive a lot
Uh-huh.
and they're the driver, or if they
Oh, yeah.
are in the car a lot but they're a passenger. So so it depends. But which side of their face ages quicker because of
Oh,
the sun.
oh, really?
And I'm just sitting here looking at you and I noticed both of us. I've never noticed it
Uh-huh.
really before. It's kind of a revelation to me just looking
Uh-huh.
at the screen.
Yeah.
Both of us are left eye. Is that your left eye? Where's your left eye?
This is my left eye.
Okay, well, I'm wrong then.
What?
See, my left eye seems to be much more closed than my right eye. And I just now wondered if it's because it's the sun side of, because I've spent a lot of my life driving. Yours is the opposite. So
it looks like.
does Vicky do most of the driving?
No, I drive to church, but if we're going to go out and about, sometimes it's 50-50.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not a real, especially long distance driver. I don't like driving long distance.
I don't either.
And you had to do it for a living.
I did it for a living. Many years of my life between the church work, California is such a big state, so all the
Yes.
meetings I'd go to,
Yes.
hundreds and hundreds of miles.
Yeah.
And then my job was driving a lot every day,
Yeah.
either
Yeah.
back when I was doing insurance work or all those years with a company I was with driving all over Northern California.
Yeah.
I would put many years, I'd put 35, 40, 50,000 miles on my car. And that's just, we call it windshield time.
Yeah. I remember
Just
you
a
using
lot of
that term.
windshield
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I guess it has its effect. I know it had its effect on my body as far as I always had a lot of lower back problems and neck and shoulder problems.
Okay. From the
And a
car.
lot of that is just from time in the car.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of the driving in California is very tense driving,
Oh,
heavy
I know.
traffic,
Yes.
dangerous situations and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, the types of work that I did besides my pastoral work, which also involves a lot of study time, office time, computer time.
Yeah.
So you're sitting, kind of hunched over and reading and studying and writing. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the reasons I try to go to the gym as often as I do, 4 days
Yeah.
a week usually.
Yeah.
And I take these core classes. I take these pretty high intensity classes.
Hmm.
It involves a lot of stretching, but a lot of weight work, a lot of cardio, a lot of just a good full body workout.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to offset, the damage I've done to myself all through those years.
Yeah. Does it include swimming? Do you swim?
No,
No. No.
I should.
Mm.
Swimming is such a great low impact kind of exercise. You're not damaging your joints or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
bones and everything. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been much of a swimmer. I've swam a lot in my life,
Mhm.
but more for fun and not really ever for workout much.
For workout. Yeah. Yeah. But what you're doing now, brother, with your studies, and you send out your studies to your mailing list and everything,
Mm-hmm.
is actually what I had prayed for back when you still worked at 3M.
I remember that.
When you worked at 3M, I realized how much windshield time you had, and I also realized your wealth of knowledge in that brain of yours. It was being underused, and so I began to pray. That I may have shared this with you. I began to pray that the Lord would take you off the road, that 3M would realize your days of driving many miles, or maybe should be behind you, that they should bring you into the office and have you actually hire and train people, recruit them to replace yourself. Because you were such a good salesman, for you to train the people, hire them and train them yourself. That was my prayer. That would keep you off many, many, many miles of road, keep you employed until you were ready to retire. Well, the Lord didn't answer my prayer that way. You
I have to blame. Your prayers. So actually, your prayers kind of worked, but instead of them offering me a nice office job to train somebody else, they said, "We think you're going to retire a few years early." They're having cutbacks, and
yeah.
I was close to retirement age, and
Yeah.
they kind of had a big youth movement and a lot of younger guys coming on, and so I was
Yeah.
more expendable.
Yeah.
And so they offered me a little severance package, but it wasn't much.
Uh,
And but they kind of presented it in a way of, you really don't have a whole lot of choice in this.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at the time, it was very upsetting. This is just
Yeah.
3 years ago, almost right now. It was
Yeah.
in May,
Yeah.
3 years ago. Very upsetting. I got shingles. I got really just, it affected me
Yeah.
physically
Yeah. Yeah.
because, you know, it wasn't on my terms. It was kind of forced
Right.
on me.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And, but looking back is one of the best things that ever happened. I was
Yeah.
going to try to hang on a few more years,
Yeah.
but, you know, it was really taking a toll on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were having to me, you know, the last few years, they had me do a lot more than just Northern California. It was Oregon and Washington, and I think it's 5 or 6 Western states. So I was ended up, you know, having to go to Denver and Salt Lake City, and I kind of enjoyed exploring those places I'd never been to before. But still, oh, okay,
Yeah.
that means now instead of just like day trips or overnight, you're gone for 2 or 3 days at a time.
So they were realizing what they were going to do as you got a little bit older. They milked you for all it was worth.
Was that it? I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but I sure have. The last 3 years, especially, enjoyed. You know, when you're a full-time secular job, besides trying to pastor a church full-time,
Mhm.
you're just barely able to keep up with studying for your sermons and lessons.
Yeah.
Much less, you know, beyond that.
Yeah.
And I sure have enjoyed the last 3 years. If I want to chase a rabbit for 2 or 3 hours, I'll
Yes.
just chase a rabbit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, because a lot of those rabbits you chase in the Bible are pretty, you have to just kind of plod through it, you know,
Uh-huh.
just slow research, looking at different resources and
Yeah.
lots of cross references and just trying to
Yeah.
put the pieces together.
Yeah.
You just don't have time to do that if you're trying to work a full-time job. And okay, I got my next sermon lesson coming up, you know, I got to put all my time into that.
Well, this is what I was praying for. So it came in a roundabout way, but it came. And so I hope our viewers who might be on your mailing list appreciate all the extra little goodies that you send us because they are very, very valuable. And
Well, I hope so. I don't know how valuable they are. You know, a lot of them are just pretty short and incomplete, but they're intended. I had this little book, you know, back when we started preaching, we were afraid we were going to exhaust all the sermons possible within 1 year. So I bought a couple of these little books like Snappy Sermon Starters or, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, they just kind of give you ideas
Yeah.
of possible sermons.
Yeah.
And I would use some of those, you know, because some of them were pretty good and had a few little points and you kind of build on it yourself.
Yeah. Just fill them out.
But that's kind of how I look at some of these handouts I send is, you know, just a lot of times that central idea, that main thought, that spark is the main thing you need.
Yeah.
And even if you're doing mainly expository preaching, okay, you got this chunk of scripture in front of you and you're trying to dissect it, put it together in sermon form, but to capture the main idea of it, maybe some of these handouts kind of contribute to that a little bit.
Well, you know, it was those handouts that you were sending me that turned out to be a book.
Oh yeah, terminology.
Yeah.
Terminology.
And so there's other studies you've done that really do also need to be turned into a book. There's just so many.
Well, most of the time on my laptop here, I have, let me see, right now it looks like about a dozen, which is kind of small number for normal. A lot of times I have anywhere from like 10 to 20 documents at the bottom.
Yeah.
You know, sitting there.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm waiting for, this is kind of the Pentecostal in me.
Yeah, right.
I'm waiting for one of them to call out my name.
There you go.
And every once in a while, of course, every week I'm studying for sermon lessons and things.
Yeah.
Special meetings coming up and all sorts of things. But, you know, if I have a little bit of time, I'll just go down and start opening up those documents.
Yeah.
And just see if one of them
jumps out
at me.
Yeah.
And some of them may sit there for weeks or months.
Yeah.
And then I may just add a few verses and a few more thoughts at a time.
Yeah.
And then put it back down there.
Yeah.
But eventually, you know, it'll strike me to go ahead and finish it off.
Yeah.
At least to the degree I can send it out.
Yeah.
and it may be far from complete, but I mean, that's part of the intended purpose of many of them, is to not send them out completed,
Yeah.
but just enough to spur the thoughts of someone saying, I think I'll take this and develop it further on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's important to do, not,
Yeah.
just always try to go through the whole process for them, but give them enough to
Yeah.
just kind of push them forward.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea, and I hope that our viewers appreciate it. And if you're a viewer looking on our site right now, or our YouTube right now, and you're not on this list, we'll show Brother Rick's email address at the end of this video. So be sure and contact him and sign up. I'll put a little plug in for you, brother.
Well, thanks, Mike. I hope they're a blessing to people. I enjoy putting them together, and
Yeah.
Sometimes I go back through my older documents of 5, 10, 20 years ago
Mhm.
that maybe I shared with other people, and I look at them and I think, what world was I thinking?
Yeah, right.
Or I revise it to some degree.
Yeah.
Or I say, boy, I really left some important stuff out. And so then I'll kind of revise it just for my own benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't have, my problem is, I don't have near the, what should I say, system that you have
Mhm.
to be able to go back and find documents.
Mhm.
Like you have a really good
Well, it's a database.
database.
Yeah,
You have a
yeah.
really good database.
Yeah.
And I don't even have a bad database. I have no database. I just have a bunch of folders and documents, and I have to kind of scroll through them and try to find, and of course, then in your mind, you're thinking of, okay, this subject, but the title of the document may be something entirely different, or
Yeah.
the main thought of the document may be in the title, but the couple of words that start the title
Mhm.
kind of throws it off from being able to find it
Yeah.
if you don't have a database.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes I'll be searching for a particular subject I know I've studied and wrote about in the past, but I have the hardest time finding it because the title name is enough different that I just have to kind of go through all of them and look up a few of them to see if that's the one. No, that's not it. Okay, let's go look for another one. So that is a confession of lack of organization on my part.
Well, and it's for that very reason that I had a database, because I knew I couldn't remember it, so I had to start a database to retrieve information.
So my thought at the time was always, yeah, but if I set up a database and I plug this in some way to that database, that's going to take an extra 5 or 10 minutes of my time at the moment.
Yes, yes.
And that's kind of what keeps me from doing it. Whereas
Yeah.
you're smarter than I am. You say, but in the long run, it's worth it. It saves you a lot of time later.
Well, that way you're searching for the one document rather than looking under 10 rocks to see if it's there. So, but
that's why I have depended on you through the years.
I think we make a good team. You provide the material, I'll archive it.
Hey, let's get started before people are going to say, are they just going to chit chat the whole session here?
Well, hey, old friends, that's what old friends do, right?
So this is obviously, though, for our viewers, sometimes I watch these YouTube videos. Maybe it's about a Bible subject, and maybe it's a couple of men like you and I, they kind of work as a team.
Mm-hmm.
But you can tell, like, the first 5 minutes, they've kind of planned ahead. Well, we have to have like 5 minutes of small talk to make it more personal before we jump into our discussion.
Uh-huh.
Well, obviously, we don't limit it to 5 minutes. And obviously, it's not very well scripted. We just kind of go on till we're ready to jump into our session. So
yes.
Maybe we should, this database idea of yours that you use, maybe we should, in these videos, like say, if you want to avoid the chit chat opening discussion and go right to the subject.
Yeah,
go to this minute mark.
Yeah, go to the 22-minute mark.
And you see a lot of these videos on YouTube, they have them like chopped up into sections. You can kind of see the timeline at the bottom.
Yeah.
Kind of go from unit to unit.
Yeah.
And so I know I'm not skilled enough to do that, but you probably are getting there to where eventually we may be able to offer that to our viewers.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now that they've toiled through our opening remarks, we'll try to get into our discussion. And today is session number 30, and we've made it through the book of Genesis, and we're starting the book of Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at I was doing these as sermons for Liberty, and I was looking at my introduction to Exodus sermon outline, as I probably preached it maybe 3 or 4 months ago at Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And my opening remarks was something like, I've got it right here, let me look at it, I'll just read it. My opening remarks was this: I had been staring at this huge, beautiful mountain called Exodus. Mm. This mountain is very tall. It has a lot of rich plant and animal life on it, and all of them speak about Christ. So as important as Genesis is, Exodus in its own way is just as important, because it carries on and adds some major themes that are developed all through the Bible. Of course, the name itself, Exodus, the idea of deliverance, exit, of major themes of really developed in this book that have, to a large degree, have developed human life, transformed the world in some way, especially Western civilization. Mm-hmm. The whole idea developed more completely in the book of Exodus of monotheism. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that God enforced upon Israel this understanding of one true God. And we talked about this a little bit before our session about mm-hmm. Yahweh, mm-hmm. Tetragrammaton, WH, VH, or YHVH, yeah. And the meaning behind it. Mm-hmm. We'll get into that in Exodus chapter 3.
Yeah.
But basically, it's from the most basic verb mm-hmm. of all verbs, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The to be verb.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is kind of the heart of it.
Yeah.
He is. He is. He was. He will be. Mm-hmm. So we'll kind of develop that further. Mm-hmm. But monotheism, the Ten Commandments, of course, which is the basic moral code of all Western civilization. Until recent years, it was often included in legal settings, courtrooms.
Yes.
Because, we just understood that this is the basis for justice and mercy and legal forms. But then a Pharaoh rose up who did not know Joseph, and he became a tyrant. And so those themes are developed throughout the book of Exodus. And most people in all of history have lived under tyranny. Mm-hmm. And yet they want to be free. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of introduces us to this idea, and a lot of people don't seem to grasp this, that even though this Exodus is dealing with his people, Israel, being delivered from Egypt, it's really God's purpose for the whole world as seen through Israel. In other words, God's purpose for the whole world of liberating them from sin and tyranny had to include the deliverance of Israel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because God's purpose for the world was to be accomplished through his purpose through Israel.
Yes.
And so the same themes that apply to Israel apply to the world at large, but they are channeled through Israel. He wanted to get them back in that promised land, that they could be a light to the Gentiles,
Mhm.
and that they could be a witness to the whole world, and so that his purpose for the world could be accomplished better by Israel being delivered from Egypt and settled in their own land.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's kind of this interesting dual purpose
Mhm. Yes.
that's going on through Israel, but it's really underlying principles that are true for the whole world.
And unfortunately, there were times, a good portion of their history, where even they didn't get it, what God was doing or attempting to
Right? They
do.
didn't. Yeah.
You know? And
they-
God, in His fairness, would correct them every bit as much as any other nation that needed correcting.
I mean, even when Jesus came, we say that he came for the sins of the whole world. He died for the sins of the whole world. He took the place as a substitute for the whole world. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And yet that larger purpose was to be accomplished by he came unto his own.
Mhm.
So I came not except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Mhm.
Go not among the Gentiles,
Mhm.
but keep your, the limited commission, keep your travels and your message to the people of Israel. So his focus was on Israel, but his focus was on Israel so that in their turning back to God in repentance, that would be the best hope for the whole world.
Mhm.
So people say, oh, well, he came for the whole world and he died for the sins of the whole world. So why didn't he go out among the Gentile nations?
Mhm.
But we do see a number of instances in the ministry of Christ where he purposely selected Gentile people.
Mhm.
And they, in most cases, responded better than his people Israel did.
Mhm.
I have not found such faith among Israel. And so a number of, like the 10 lepers, one of them was a Samaritan. And the Gentile is the only one who came back and thanked him, praised him.
Yeah.
Jesus said, where are the other 9? The other 9 represent the reaction of Israel toward his ministry.
Mhm.
And the one represents it seemed like whenever he reached out to the Gentiles, they received him gladly.
Yeah.
But his own people were in the process of rejecting him.
Yeah.
So it's not, those were like examples of what his purpose was for the Gentile nations by the Gentile individuals that he reached out to during his ministry. But the fact is, his purpose for the world had to be worked out through his purpose with Israel.
You know what I liken it to? You know how that in the ocean there's a river in the ocean that is its own stream, as it were, in the ocean. Some scientists discovered that, many years ago. But that's the Bible. So Israel is that narrow stream,
Mm-hmm.
and the world is the river. And so God's working both. He's working the river at large with the other nations, but as they correspond to the narrow river within it, and that's his people Israel.
Yeah. I mean, it is in this story of found in the book of Exodus that is carried directly over into the New Testament
Mhm.
for all the nations in the Great Commission. So he came to Israel. The vast majority rejected him. The nation as a whole officially rejected him, through their Jewish leaders especially. But a remnant did believe. He gathered the wheat into the barn. The chaff was burned up. But it had to be a Jewish remnant. It had to be a Jewish people representing the entire nation
Mhm.
that he developed or formed into the church.
Mhm.
And through that Jewish believing remnant that he formed the church, he gave the Great Commission.
Mhm.
So think of it a little bit this way. In taking that Jewish remnant, forming the church, giving them the worldwide commission,
Mhm.
he was showing what his desire for Israel as a nation was all along.
Yes.
they could have been that Great Commission people. They were to be that Great Commission people.
Yes, a light to the Gentiles.
A light to the Gentiles.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he showed that reality, or that desire, that failed opportunity. He showed that by purposely, and a lot of people overlook this. He purposely limited that first church to Jewish believers, because they represented what his true purpose was for the nation. And from that group of Jewish believers that he formed the church, then he said, go out into all the world. And then, so we get from the book of Exodus the principles that are brought into the church of redemption through the shedding of innocent blood, escaping the condemnation of death, going through the waters of deep water immersion baptism, coming out on the other side with God's laws, and being a part of a holy collective. That's one way I like to describe the church, a holy collective. And so those themes that are shown in the book of Exodus are directly brought over into the ecclesia idea of the New Testament.
Yes.
So again, trying to unite the whole Bible, and it easily does. I mean, it's easy to bring this over into the New Testament.
Absolutely. Even with the Pentecost experience in the New Testament, it's a duplication of what happened on Sinai, as it were. So, and I know you'll get to that when we get to that part.
Yeah, Pentecost is kind of an updated Mount Sinai experience. It had the the sounds and the sights of the Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
And it had the we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
I'm too far ahead. But.
Yeah.
So the book of Exodus is about the larger idea of salvation, isn't it? And we've talked about before, salvation must include both a deliverance from something and a deliverance unto something. Restoration, we might call it. He was trying to restore a holy seed.
Yes.
And restore them to their land, restore them to their God, to his ways. That they had lost quite a bit of that toward the end of their stay in Egypt. Not at the first, but toward the end of their stay. They had lost a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even here in Exodus, like in chapter 1 and verse 7, says the children of Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. That's a creation theme, isn't it? That takes us back to Genesis 1 and 2. Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. And so you might look at Exodus as kind of a third attempt, we would say. One would be original creation, and then of course we have right after the flood, and now again, another attempt at raising up a godly seed to represent God on the earth.
It's funny how God would use this as the catalyst, where that Pharaoh noticed that they were multiplying, like rabbits, and that's what helped jumpstart. God used to jumpstart the persecution, was the fact that they were multiplying, and he was afraid that they would outnumber his military and turn against him. Yeah.
Well, it was already showing that the hand of God was more powerful than Pharaoh or his gods, in that even in affliction, even in servitude, even in attempts at murder, they continued to grow. And that could only be by the hand of God.
Yes.
But he wasn't able to recognize it, or refused to recognize it. Then we have further themes, for instance, like in chapter 2 and 23, I think it is. It says, now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of God, or children of Israel, groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. This idea of ascended prayers that is so important, like in the book of Revelation, the saints unto the altar.
Mm-hmm.
And the incense is the prayers of the saints. And we don't, I know this is getting off a little bit, but we don't give enough place, I don't think, in the book of Revelation to the role of the prayers of the saints during that time being the catalyst
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of what happens in the book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we read about the seals and the trumpets and the bowls of wrath, but mixed through all of that is a close connection to the ascending prayers of the saints coming up before the throne of God as a sweet smelling savor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that seems to be influencing to some degree
Mm-hmm.
what is taking place on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so these Jewish saints their prayers are coming up, this idea of ascending to God. And then he says in chapter 3, in verse 7, the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, have heard their cry that came up
Mm-hmm.
because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them. Okay, there's the gospel right there,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So God hears the cries of the needs of the people, and he comes down to take care of the need. And so in the New Testament, we look at that as God coming down in the form of his son
Mm-hmm.
to take care of the need,
Yes.
to deliver people from their sins and from their own needs. This idea of up and down, we sometimes miss that in the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. We think of that as more of a New Testament idea. But the prayers ascended up, and so God came down to take care of it. In this case, he came down in the form of Moses and the plagues
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
it's just a precursor to, Jesus said it in one place, that he who came down. And boy, there's a lot in that, how far he came down.
Yes.
It's not just distance, it's in
Yeah.
so many ways he came down,
Yeah. And just
willing to come down.
to sew another thread in this rope that we're weaving, his response was also in addition to the covenant that was made with these people, their forefathers. So he was hearing their cries and responding to his promise to fulfill this covenant. Of course, everything had to happen in a time frame, right? But he heard their cries, and it was because of the covenant that he heard them.
And that is a real big piece of the puzzle. I'm glad you brought that up, because later through Exodus and their journeys across the wilderness and their rebellions and everything,
Mm-hmm.
he often reminded them, I'm going to fulfill my promises, not because anything about you, because I made the promise.
Yeah, because I made the
Because
promise.
of the covenant I made with your fathers.
Yeah, not their integrity, his
Yeah.
integrity. Yeah.
Then we have kind of another theme. I know I'm kind of doing this in a little bit of a scattered way, but this another key theme in the book of Exodus, before we jump in the details, this idea of knowing God.
Yes.
To know him. For instance, in chapter 1 and verse 8, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. There's a lot packed into that verse, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't mean he'd never met Joseph in person,
Mm-hmm.
because this was long after Joseph had died.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't really care about the history.
Yeah.
He didn't have any connection to it.
Mm-hmm.
He did not know, in the sense of, it really didn't make much of an impression on him how Joseph had basically rescued Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and how Joseph had basically become the solution to the world's problems by the dreams that he had, and by the things that he instituted for the preserving of the grain and everything. Really,
Are you saying that he was the first cancel culture guy?
yeah, this Pharaoh. But he says, who did not know Joseph. So that also means He did not know the God of Joseph.
Yes.
He did not know the covenant that God had made with these people.
Yes.
He did not care.
Yeah.
He did not place any importance on why did a former Pharaoh allow them to come down here, give them such a good piece of land, and make sure that no harm came to them. None of that mattered
Right.
to him. So this little verse carries a lot deeper meaning
Mhm.
than sometimes what we give it. So it says he did not know Joseph. Then in chapter 5 and verse 2, when Moses and Aaron finally confront Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord." So that's the fuller idea
Mhm.
of chapter 1 and verse 8. He did not know Joseph, meaning he really didn't know the God of Joseph. And because of that, I will not let Israel go. But it's even a broader or deeper idea of this idea of knowing. Chapter 2 or chapter 6, the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will let them go. With a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." God spoke to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord." So there's that Yahweh idea.
Mhm.
I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob as God Almighty. So we'll get into that more detail. I don't want to get into it now. But it says, going down to verse 5, I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel. So their prayers ascended, so he
Mhm.
came down,
Mhm.
whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. So not just the idea of knowing is a major theme, but the idea of remembering.
Mhm.
God remembered his covenant. It's not like he forgot, but it came to the forefront once again.
Mhm.
And then uh, this idea of remembering, not forgetting. Beware lest you forget.
Mhm.
The Bible says a few times. Uh, on the Passover, he said, "This is a remembrance, something I
Mhm.
want you to remember."
Yeah.
Then in the law, he said, "Remember the Sabbath." But all of them kind of mean the same: as remember the promise I made, remember where you came from, remember what your destiny is. Always keep it in the forefront of your thoughts. This idea of remembering and not forgetting is also a theme weaved through here. But we're talking about knowing. In verse 6, therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. So all these I wills that are really important in the Bible. I will rescue you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm with great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. So if you just take verse 6 and 7, there are what? 5 I wills. That's a good 5-point sermon right there.
Yes. Yes.
But he goes on in verse 8 and adds a couple more. But it says in verse 7, then you shall know that I am the Lord. So the purpose of God in the plagues, showing his power and so forth, was not just so that the Egyptians and Pharaoh would know who the true God is, as opposed to their false gods, but so that Israel would know.
Mhm.
You say, well, didn't they know? Well, they had forgotten quite a
Mhm.
bit of it.
Mhm.
They felt like God had forsaken them. They were in bondage. Things had turned against them. And so they had lost a lot of that. So God was doing much of this to reinforce in their thinking, help them to remember
Mhm.
who they were, who God was, what their destiny was.
Mhm.
So then you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into. So there's this repeated theme all through. We've talked about Deuteronomy before that really highlights this. But it's right here, isn't it?
Mhm.
I will bring you out from under the burdens, and I will bring you into the land. So this idea of salvation means deliverance from and a deliverance to.
Yeah.
So It's a much fuller idea than
Mm-hmm.
people give it. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. And then again in chapter 10 and verse 2, this is way over in the 8th plague, the locusts. And the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine before him, that you may tell in the hearing of your son's sons, the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you, again, it's speaking about Israel,
Mm-hmm.
that you may know that I am the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So we can say, well, we're God's people, we're saved, we're baptized, we're in the church, and all of that. But boy, there really are times that we need to say like Paul did in Philippians
Mm-hmm.
3, many years after he'd been saved, baptized in the church, doing mission work, and apostle, and receiving revelations, and long into his ministry, he said, that I may know him,
Mm-hmm.
and the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his suffering.
Yes.
So we need to know him. I mean, that's the most basic thing of the whole Bible. And knowing him continues on through our life. It's not just a one-time coming to know him, but it is a getting to know him better and deeper all through our life. And that's a lot of what the book of Exodus is about also.
Back to that stream analogy, the Lord wants to end up at the end of that inner stream. At the end of that inner stream is the throne. And that's where Jesus will sit. Everything else on the outside is all around him. Okay. So he has to keep this people intact so that stream continues, so that there'll be something there for him to follow up on as far as his messiahship, his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had to keep reining in his own people, keep this thread alive, keep this stream going, keep feeding it. But it was also meant to showcase to the wider ocean around it that he is the only true and living God, because he worked with his people on that fashion, and then as a witness to the other nations, to Nineveh, to Syria, to all the other nations. He witnessed his power as he would deal with Israel, that inner stream, which was his target anyway. But the nations will find they'll be folded into that purpose. But the mainstream is Jesus sitting on that throne. And so these people are that stream.
And the summary statement that Jesus made just before his death for the reason for their judgment is this idea of knowing him. He said, because you did not know the day of your visitation.
Yeah.
I came to pay you a visit. Your Messiah came to pay you a visit.
Yes.
You didn't even recognize it.
Yes.
Did not even make him welcome in his own house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this idea of knowing him is not just for lost people to come to know him as Savior, but for we as saints to know him better.
Yeah.
And to become closer to him and to reflect him in our life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe as a way to close out this session, because it'll take a few minutes, and I hesitate to do this because first of all, I don't know if I have it all worked out myself completely, but also because anytime in a public discussion like this, anytime you bring up numbers and years and that kind of thing, it just really gets confusing quick. Kind of hard to follow when you're just listening to it. But I know a lot of people who may listen to this session have struggled with it's really difficult to figure out, and so a lot of people just don't even try. It's important to try. It's important to try to comprehend the time factor, because the Bible brings it out. For instance, it's important to try to come to a conclusion yourself as to a starting date for the command in Daniel 9:25, the 70 weeks. Okay, from the beginning of the command to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem, so forth. Okay, which command was that? You know, one of three or four possibilities.
Yeah.
And that makes a big difference. So you do a lot of research, you think, I'm just wasting a whole lot of time, because what difference does it really matter? But the fact that the Bible highlights, okay, here's when you need to begin starting the clock, and here's what it reaches to after 483 years, is the cutting off of the Messiah. Well, that's pretty important.
Yeah.
So you at least need to try to go through the exercise of knowing the different positions and thinking about maybe which one you want to settle on. And I recently again went through all that, kind of trying to go through the starting date and how to figure out the clock and everything. And of all that, you know, we all like have books, dictionaries, we go online and do a lot of research, trying to figure out these timelines. When should the clock start? When does it stop? When what event really sets it off? And and so people just avoid it. But of all I've accessed through my ministry, and I just ordered the book and I haven't gotten it yet, but I do have it downloaded. You can download it for free. But it's, you know, hundreds of pages long with a lot of charts and everything, so it makes it kind of difficult. So I just went ahead and ordered the book. But for the last several years, the main resource I've been using for that kind of information is a book by Floyd Nolan Jones.
Oh, I've heard of him.
And it's called The Chronology of the Old Testament. And it's really good. And I've come to rely on his information more than most people. And so that's where I was able to come to the conclusion that the starting date for the 483 years was to be 454 BC, and brought it to the time of the death of Christ, and in my conclusion is 30 AD. And it just is the simplest and most straightforward information he gives, to where you don't have to have gaps and you don't have to have try to make up for years and things like that. He just starts it at that date, and you take away a year because there's no year zero, and it brings it right to 30 AD. And that's the year he has for the death of Christ. And I know other people have it anywhere from 26 to 30 AD, depending on what day of the week you think the death was and the Passover. And it just makes gets pretty complicated. But
where this
I like what he says, and you know, it's important also, for instance, to think about maybe what year he died, and and I bring all that up to say that regarding the Exodus, the Bible gives us some information that it's important to try to work out if we can. In Genesis 15 and 13, when God told Abram, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years." Okay, so first talk about the 400 years. Second, we talk about the three parts to this: to be strangers in a land not theirs, serve them and afflict them 400 years. The first thing we need to work out is we have to realize that they were not slaves for 400 years.
Right. Only about half that time.
Only about half that time.
Yeah.
And many people say exactly half, 400, half of the 430 that some verses talk about. So 215 years. But Floyd Nolan Jones, in his chronology, he does a good job of taking these. There's 3 or 4 main verses that talk about 400 years or 430 years. So this one, of course, is 400. And you notice one interesting thing that helps figure it out is it does not say that whole time is going to be in Egypt. They're not going to be in Egypt for 400 years. Even in Canaan, they were in a land not theirs. Even though it had been promised to them, it was not theirs by possession. So he does a good job, and others have, and I've accepted that this is talking about his time when he first came down into Canaan, and then he went into Egypt, and moving forward to the time of the Exodus, covers that whole time period. And then we have, well, it says in Genesis 12:3 that he was 75 years when he departed from Haran, so he came down when he was 75. And so the difference between 400 and 430 might be the 430 is from the time he came down into the land. And the 400 is from the time, and Jones brings this out, and I think I agree with it, that the 400 is from the time Isaac was weaned. Isaac was 5 years old, so it'd be 30 years later. So the 400 is from the time Isaac was weaned, because that's the time that Ishmael mocked him. And that whole idea of the mocking begins. And the rejection of God's election and the raging against it. So to me, that makes sense about the difference between the 400 and the 430, because it was 30 years from the time Abram came into the land, 75. Then he's 100 when Isaac was born, and then he was 5 years later, Isaac was weaned. That's the difference in those 30 years.
But one important element, Brother Rick, on this whole time thing is it's going to affect the Pharaoh. Which Pharaoh?
Yeah, which Pharaoh? Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So this is important. You're right. It's important, and our viewers, like you said, some of them may have already done their own research. So we're going to take it from a certain angle, and they can determine for themselves. We'll present it in one way.
Well, this is just information for people to use for their own research. But in Exodus 12 and 40, the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt. So you notice even the wording, okay, it doesn't really say the time of Israel in Egypt. It says the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt. So the first time they were in Egypt was when Abram went down there, chapter 12, and they were sojourning the whole time, even in Canaan, but they only were in Egypt a portion of that 430, some say 215. The time Joseph and then Jacob came down there until the time they left. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So, not necessarily the nation, but the nation began with Abraham, and he did live in Egypt for a period of time.
They were in Abraham's loins, right?
They were in exactly Abraham's loins. So I guess one thing I'm trying to say is, don't make Israel slaves in Egypt, for 400 or 430 years.
Right.
Is just a portion of that time, maybe about half or less. In fact, it kind of gets confusing, but several people I did research on said that there was about 300 years from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses. But Floyd Nolan Jones says there was only 64 years, and that seems kind of short, doesn't it? 64 years from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses. But you take the fact that Joseph died at 110, and Moses didn't bring them out of Egypt till he was 80, So you have to factor all that in, and you can come up with around 215 years, which is what a lot of people say. And then we have that passage in Acts 7 when Stephen was giving his great sermon, and he mentions this time period. He says in Acts 7 and verse 6, but God spoke in this way that his descendants would, number one, sojourn in a foreign land. And again, it doesn't name Egypt. So in some sense, they were sojourning in a foreign land, both in Egypt and Canaan. Basically, because Hebrews 11 and other passages says they were strangers and pilgrims.
Yeah.
So we can't say, well, he gave it to them by promise. Yes, he did, but they didn't actually possess it. So Abram even said, and Isaac and Jacob in different times and ways confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims, sojourners. They didn't possess it until Joshua brought them in. So we read Egypt into these verses as if the whole time should be Egypt. But that's not really what it says. You have to read it kind of carefully. His descendants would sojourn in a foreign land, that they would bring them into bondage and oppress them. And the whole 3 steps would be 400 years. Not the oppression wouldn't necessarily be 400 years unless you include the idea that the oppression starts with the mocking of Ishmael and Hagar against Sarah and Isaac. And you know, Galatians 4 does call it mocking. So the animosity of those not of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the oppression and mocking against them did begin with Hagar and Ishmael. So that I think there's more there than we realize. What God is really trying to say is that opposition against God's election of a particular bloodline began with Hagar and Ishmael.
Yes.
And Egypt was an extension of that, but the roots of it go back. And Hagar was an Egyptian,
Right.
and then she had her son marry an Egyptian woman. So there were a number of connections to Egypt all along. And so Hagar and Ishmael in some way represents the opposition and servitude and mocking that Egypt later represented. But they were not actually slaves as we think of for the full 400 or 430 years. And then Galatians 3, of course, that this kind of adds to the difficulty of figuring all this out. But Galatians 3 and 16 and 17, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say unto seeds as of many, but as of one, to your seed who is Christ. And I say this, that the law, which was 430 years later. 430 years later from what? From the promise given to Abraham. So 430 years from Genesis 12, 1 through 3, when he was 75, 430 years. 400 years then would be from the time Isaac was weaned, 25 or 30 years later. I think that's where you get the difference between the 400, 430. So people try to make the whole 400 or 430 being in Egypt, but this verse really knocks that out and clarifies it by saying that the law was given 430 years after the promise was given to Abraham. So that's the starting and ending point, is Genesis 12 to Exodus 19. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in because it is important to try to work this out in your own mind, and it doesn't mean that we ever come to a place where we answer all of the questions, solve all of the problems, but at least try to work it through to where you kind of have it set in your mind that God works on a clock. And it's good to try to figure out the start of that clock and then the end of that clock and how it all fits into his overall plan. Because 430 then of course 490. These kind of numbers really become important in a larger outworking of prophecy.
Yes.
They're important prophetic numbers.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm excited as we wade into this. So is that your overview then before we...
Yeah, I was just looking at a little chart in his book. Yeah, see, he has the 215 years. It's real common. He has the start of it when Jacob brought his family down into Egypt.
Mm.
So the 215 years covers the whole time until the Exodus. So therefore he would only have a portion of the 215 being in servitude.
Mm-hmm.
Not even the full 215, which I think is probably correct. You know, we just tend to think that the servitude was bad. And if you were that generation that you lived your whole life in servitude, it was bad.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't think of it as, you know, covering 3 or 4 generations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we'll try to work more of this out. It's just kind of a stumbling way of working through it, or bringing it up right now, and we'll try to develop it more as we go along.
Well, it prepares our viewers for what will be ahead, that we're going to, you know, look into this more in more detail.
This first chapter of Exodus is really interesting, as he tries to kill them off, and as God works through a couple of women midwives to spare them. Is a really beautiful story.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, I could hardly wait.
Well, you're going to jump in big parts of it. You have some information about the name of God that you're going to share with us. And I know you have taught and preached on the plagues and in Mount Sinai and the giving of the law and all that, in the tabernacle and all that a lot. So I'm looking forward to what you have to share with us.
Did I ever send you that PowerPoint on the plagues? It was a 3-part PowerPoint, so 3 separate files.
I believe you did.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is in my Mike Maney file, which is a pretty large file. And within that Mike Maney file, I have a Mike Maney PowerPoint file with all the many PowerPoints you've shared with me through the years. Now, before we get off, would you, and we probably should do this next couple of sessions, promote your meeting and remind people the dates, and maybe it's not too late for people to plan to come.
Yeah, so it's our meeting is July 23rd, starts on a Friday, runs through that Sunday, and our featured speakers are Nick Winkleman from California and John Hughes from California. So those are our 2 featured speakers. Yes,
those California boys, they're going to cause some trouble.
Oh, I know. Yeah, that's why we invite them.
You like trouble. You invite trouble.
We do. Yes. So we're looking forward to this, our annual meeting, and we're just blessed when people just kind of come. We're out of the way. We're not in the mainstream, so we're up and over. And so,
it's not like you can stop by there on the way to somewhere else too much, is it?
No, we are
in the Glacier Park or something.
Yeah. So,
or unless you're visiting Yellowstone and you take a few days off to go up there.
Those are your 2 destination points, Glacier and Yellowstone. We're right in between.
I don't want to discourage people from coming, but I did read the other day that all of the national parks are expecting record-breaking crowds this summer.
Oh, wow.
You know, people were cooped up for a year or so, and they want to get out, and a lot of people are still afraid of flying. The cruise lines are still shut down.
Yeah.
Some of the other countries are not opened up, and so it's limited choices people have, and they want to get out and see the national parks again.
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, when we came to your meeting, at first we had thought to, we did stay a few extra days and went up to Glacier, but we thought about adding a few days more and going to Yellowstone, because I've never been to Yellowstone.
Mhm.
But then we started reading the reports about how they were expecting record crowds 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and it can really get pretty crazy. You know, I've spent my whole life going to Yosemite. I've been to Yosemite probably 25 times.
Yeah.
And I love it. But,
Yeah.
you know, through the years, I've learned don't go in the summer. We try to go
Hmm.
before Memorial Day and after Labor Day.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to see the waterfalls, go before Memorial Day. And the falls are in full form
Hmm.
and without as many crowds.
Yeah.
But if you just want to go, it's really great in the fall time, the change of colors. Waterfalls are kind of dried up almost, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But the main thing in the summer, you're going to be in stop and go traffic and hard to find parking places, and everywhere you walk, there's crowds of people.
And now gasoline is just going sky high.
Well, in California, especially, it's a lot of places are pushing $5 a gallon.
Mhm.
I mean, we were over at the Monterey area last week, and it was $4.50 a gallon. So California, I think, is at least $1 a gallon higher than other places are.
Wow.
And I keep reading where it's going to just keep going up. And
Yeah.
of course, a lot of people are saying that's part of the plan, and it may be
Hmm.
part of the plan. I mean, the party in power right now in general is anti-fossil fuels, just in general.
Yeah.
And so part of that is try to force people to go toward other means of power and to use fossil fuels less. I mean, we need to save the planet, they tell us.
Hmm.
We keep driving our cars, we're going to destroy the planet and kill the population. So, it's this humanism in control of thinking that it's up to us. We are God.
Right.
And, it's up to us. So anyway, that's where we are.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to it for whoever can come at $4.50 a gallon or whatever. maybe in a month it'll be.
What
5.
is it there? Is it probably 3 or 3?
Yeah. Well, it's climbing all over. But, oh well, we're gonna have a good time. We're gonna hear some good preaching, and just enjoy while we can before the shoe drops, as I say.
Well, we'll be praying for it. It's
well, yes, thank you.
I've been to I think that was my 4th one through the years.
Yeah,
and enjoyed it every time.
Yeah,
I would encourage people to go.
Yeah, we sure enjoy having you come up, and who knows, maybe next year we'll make another stab and have you guys come up again, and you can make Yellowstone the second destination.
Well, good talking to you, Mike.
Yeah, good talking to you.
We'll if people watch this, depending on how good a job Mike does, but there was a glitch. We had a little breakdown and had to get off and reboot and start back up partway through our session. So he's going to try to figure out a way to fuse 2 sessions together and give no appearance. No one would know unless I brought it up that there was any problem. But
no pressure.
In case there is a little bit, you'll know that that's what we had to do and did our best to correct it.
Yes. We'll try.
It's all on you, Mike.
Oh, no. Thanks, brother. Well, I've always said that you always keep me in stitches, so you really pushed it to the limit today.
Well, there's a lot of good information we're going to be looking at in Exodus.
Yes, it is. Yeah. All right. You have a great day.
You too, Mike.
Okay.
Adios.
All right. Bye.